Hey yo, it's your boy Ancient Albatross here. Got my buddy Spigs down below.
What's up, guys? I'm here. Welcome back to the CU. We got our brother from another mother here, AlphaDean. Welcome aboard.
Hey everybody, I come from by way of upstate New York or by way of the stars or the Nile or whatever you want to talk about forevermore. Hi there.
So yeah,
I
today,
think today.
go on.
Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead. I was gonna say today we're gonna talk about one shots and why we love them, how to craft them, and all that good stuff. So this should be interesting.
Yep. One shots are definitely our forte, as most people on the server know. Well, it's basically all we do at this point. It just kind of fits into our schedules well. So yeah, it's what we do.
So I'll kick it off with the first question, fellas. You ready?
Yes, sir.
What is a one shot? How would you define a one shot? Who wants to go first? Dean, since it's your first episode with us, why don't you kick us off?
Very simply defined, a one shot is a quick 4 hour, to anywhere between 3 and 6 hour adventure that you use to get people's whistle wet, intrigue them, and make them come back for more. And it's normally a self-contained story that, like I said, can take place in a 3 to 6 hour window. We normally do it in 4.
Yes. Al?
That's a pretty good definition. It's a good way to wet your whistle, so to speak, or wet the whistles of other people. I know, and on top of what Dean said, how it's just a one shot you played in one session, 3 to 6 hours, whatever have you. One shots are also a good way to try out new things that you might mess up a longer campaign or something like that. So it's always good. It's a good way to test out things as well.
Yeah, I would add a little bit to that. I would say it's a self-contained story, almost like an episode of a television show or a good 2 hour movie. You know that you compact this story with a beginning, middle, and end, and you wrap it up with a nice bow at the end. So there's some like finality to the story, and it's personally my favorite way to game.
Yep, I think we'd all agree on that point.
Yeah. So Dean, are you gonna hit us with the next question?
Uh, what are the advantages to one shots? And if you were giving somebody advantages of doing this, what would you say, Al?
I kind of touched on it just now, but it's a good way to try out stuff that you might not have done before, or you want to see how it goes in a live game, not necessarily implemented in a long-term campaign where it won't really break anything. If it doesn't work right or whatever have you, it's not the end of the world because again, it is just a one shot and that is just that one game. There's going to be no running issues from the new thing you're trying out.
I think we all come from playing online exclusively mostly nowadays, I guess. And the biggest advantage, in my opinion, is you get to weed out who you get along with at the table. A one shot is getting into a game with somebody is like a marriage. And the best way to say is, if I'm running a one shot and I have all new players, my style might not gel with the way they play their gameplay, and they might not gel with me. I might not enjoy the way they play their characters or the way they game as well. So a one shot is the best way to gauge interest amongst each other as gamers and GMs. And there's no hard feelings if you run a one shot and it doesn't go well or you don't get along with everyone at the table. It was only a one shot. You only get to spend 4 hours together. No love lost.
And I would add to that too. I think the one of the biggest advantages to one shots is just that it does allow the ability to play, because real life happens. I know my at home in real life group. We get together here and there. It's no regularity to it. Whereas setting up the one shots to play them online, as Al so eloquently put it, this is where we play most of the time, always gives you that opportunity to play, because I found if I can run a one shot every week, I can play every week because there's somebody who's going to be on the play. So I think that's a huge advantage. Advantage to being, with the one shots, you actually get to play.
And you get to play so many different genres. Like today we could be playing sci-fi, tomorrow we could be playing horror, then the next week we're playing Dean Supers. It doesn't matter. You could touch every genre. It's a one shot, so you could just dabble in every genre you possibly could think of. That's why I love them so much.
And guys, we're talking about out here, people who are watching us, we're talking about this from the perspective of Cypher System, but you can do this with any system that has the ability to run multiple genres of gaming, or even if you want to stay in the same genre, you can always do self-contained, adventures. I'm actually going to touch on something a little later with one of our other questions that kind of will give you an idea how to turn one shots into a campaign. So,
so that's a perfect lead into Al. What's the next question there, buddy?
So yeah, where do you guys, or where do you get your inspiration for one shots? There's a lot of different venues or avenues of entertainment or whatever have you that give you spark ideas. I know me personally is like the media I intake, like the animes I watch or the movies I watch or cartoons or whatever have you. I see an idea or characters in a story. And I'm like, oh hey, wouldn't it be cool to see these characters doing this thing, or maybe seeing the same story but played out with different characters, which is where the PCs come in. They're not necessarily the same characters from the show or the movie, but they're in the same exact situation that's presented in the media of whatever it may be. And I personally really enjoy seeing that how player characters, the players, how they go about resolving a scene as opposed to how it got resolved in the movie or the show or whatever. That's personally one of my biggest inspirations as far as this stuff goes.
I literally get my inspiration from everywhere, from work, TV. It doesn't matter. I'll spark an idea. I'll give you a perfect example. I ran a zombie apocalypse one shot called God Doesn't Love Us Anymore. It was I'm an operations director for a military museum. I happen to work on an aircraft carrier, and my wife is a big fan of Walking Dead. So I was at work one day, I was on the flight deck, and I said, you know what? Right on the west side of Manhattan, this would be really cool if you were sole survivors on this aircraft carrier. And I imagined the west side of Manhattan just being covered with zombies like a George Romero flick. And that night I went home, I think it was Ancient. I said, hey, I got this idea for a one shot. I want to do zombies on the west side of Manhattan and everyone's stuck on an aircraft carrier. And I ran it 2 or 3 times. I think everyone had a good time. Dean, I think you played in that one time. I know, Al, you definitely played in that. And ideas come from everywhere. And, we copy movies a lot. I love to adapt movies and give it my own little twist. And I know Dean likes to do the same. And I know Al likes to take video games and adapt them. So you can pretty much get your ideas from anywhere. It's just about being creative, and whatever sparks your imagination, just have enough confidence that it'll spark others as well.
And my biggest inspiration for doing one shots, probably kind of add like Anthony is everything, but it's just like little weird things will trigger it. I'll having a conversation, like my best friend was here from California a couple of weeks ago, and we grew up watching kung fu movies, all the Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest films, the 5 Deadly Venoms and all of that. And I remember looking at it and I'll go, you know what, there's never really been a game out there that captured the whole wuxia style movies. And so genres spark my imagination, because I'll look at, things like that, or I do like to do genre mashups. Those things happen. Like I'd like to do Wild West and horror together, and I'm into the noir thing, but I've added a supernatural element to it. I'm going to be running a one shot, coming up soon. It's called The Grace of Demons, and it's going to be a mashup between 1940s gangsters and demons and stuff like this. These things, just the ability to put together a few ideas and make them into these full-blown, flamboyant, storylines. And then the coolest part about it is my second inspiration is I love player reaction. I'm truly inspired by my players. So whenever I get an interest or I start getting feedback on something, it kind of fuels the flame to put something together.
You brought up a good point with mashups. Mashups are the best to make one shots with, because you could get these two ideas that are like polar opposites, and it's so much fun as a creative person, as a GM, to say, how do I make these two pieces that don't seem to fit together?
Exactly.
And you find most of the time you could have the two most outrageous ideas, but with a little thought and some creative players, you could come up with something really special. And
Well,
go ahead.
No, I was just going to add to that, because like I said, I was talking about the noir thing, and there's going to be a pulp element that's coming along too. So you remember, I don't know how many of you watched those old serials that they used to show in the movie theater, but my father got me into them. So I watched the old Captain Marvel when it was serialized. I watched the old Rocket Man, and
was it Flash Gordon serialized as well? Yeah.
Flash Gordon, Rocket Man, which became the Rocketeer, Old Bullethead, Captain Marvel, the Whisperer, the Shadow. All of these things like this were so engaging. And the thing about it was, that's something else that you should, as a creative person, if you want to get into, especially if you haven't GM before, watch some of those older things, because they didn't rely on special effects. They didn't have it. They relied on smoke and mirrors. They relied on setting, and they relied on the power of story. So those things will actually inspire you, I think, and show you the direction of, building that one shot, and building that community. So
I think that's a good segue into the next question, which is probably the biggest question we'll probably ask all day today, but is, how do you craft a one shot? Al, would you like to start us off?
Yeah, I mean, I learned how to do this from you, basically, Anthony Spiggs. You basically taught me that, there should be a beginning, a middle, and end, just like any story. And you should always make sure that the scenes, you don't want to plan too many scenes, because the players won't get to them. There won't be enough time for that stuff. So you basically plot out 3 major scenes, maybe 2 even if you have 2 really big scenes. And then you kind of just, maybe you craft a couple NPCs for those scenes, get some ciphers put aside. This is for Cypher System specifically. You get a list of ciphers already put aside. You don't have to roll during the game. Having to roll on the table slows down the game a whole ton. So part of crafting a one shot for me, and I guess for most of us, is have that list of stuff that you could pull, a smaller list instead of the whole book of lists. And I mean, and obviously the first step, I missed this point completely, is decide on what you want to run, like what genre, what do you want to see happen in the one shot, and then you work from there. Yeah, but let you guys. Do you want?
Dean, would you like to touch this?
I'll say this, more or less what you guys are saying. I do it maybe a little differently. Is normally whatever inspires me, I then turn it into an outline. And my outlines are very simplistic though, because with a one shot, you shouldn't try to force your characters down, your players down a path. I don't believe in railroading players, even in a campaign. But I don't like to railroad anyone. What I do is I build an outline. I build basically what the final goal is my first thought. What's the final goal? And then I'll think of, between 1 and 4 obstacles, whether it's an NPC, whether it's an item, whether it's a location. I'll put together those few things, and there it is. There's the one shot. It's set. The last major one shot that I did like that, was I was inspired. I had watched Stephen King's The Mist, and I called it Shadow. So I switched it around. Instead of a mist coming in, these dark shadows came in and blocked out the light. Okay, the major thing that I had set up, the way I set up the outline was, okay, everybody is caught in the equivalent of a Best Buy. There's a warehouse area behind it, and you had the three major antagonists, and of course you had the Bible thumper in there. Crazy enough, the guys got past the Bible thumper because they ended up letting her get killed like right away. It was just, it was perfect, you know. But this way I was able to maneuver through their machinations, and it was awesome. And I think that's the key to a good one shot, is being able to react to your players as opposed to making your players react to you, because they're building the story. You know where it's going, you know, and you as a good GM can always redirect back onto where the story should go without making the players feel like, oh God, that's not what I wanted to do.
You see, I pretty much follow the same line of thinking you do. I try to ask myself three questions when I run a one shot. The first question is, what's the mood and what's the pace that I want this one shot to run in? Do I want, what's the tempo? Do I want it to be fast paced? Do I want it to be something that's like a gradual build up? The second thing I ask is, what's the end goal of this one shot? No matter what genre you're running, one shots are a lot different than a campaign where you could be a little more open ended. And this may sound like sacrilegious to some, but it has to be linear in somewhat. You only have a 4 or 5 hour window to tell a specific story. So with a one shot, you have to have at least a little bit of a railroad, because you want to tell you want to tell a certain story in a certain amount of time, and with that, unfortunately, you have to have some sort of rails. I'm not saying that you can't allow the players to have freedom, but you have to have some sort of end goal, because it's like a con game. No one wants to play in a con game where it's like you're in the middle of a combat. Okay, it's 4 hours. Okay, we're done. You have to lead them to at least a complete story.
I'll say it this way: the rail should be a roller coaster and not a train.
That's a good way to put it. Yes.
Yeah. That's literally how I run it. I run it as a roller coaster.
And the last question I ask myself, which is funny because should be the first question, but it's usually the last question I ask myself, is, how do I start this game? Because I want my beginning to be as memorable as my ending. Because with a one shot, you want to start with action and you want to end with action. I don't like the build up. We're playing, once again, we only have 4 hours. I don't want to play for an hour before we actually see some sort of push of the narrative. I want there to be immediate satisfaction as soon as we sit down and get ready to game. So that's usually the last question I ask myself, is, how do I start this? And then I know Al touched on it, but it's the beginning, middle, and end. With a one shot, you do need that structure. Right. But I just happened to ask the beginning question at the very end.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so my question for you guys would be, if you had to, how would you transition a one shot into a campaign? Or what are your thoughts on that?
Well, first, this is the obvious point. The players will have to be interested in turning it into a campaign. There has to be that they have to have loved what you did. And even if it had, again, it's a one-shot, it had a final ending, it doesn't have to be the final ending for the characters in the game. It could be the end of that story arc or whatever have you, and then the players take their characters and move on to a different story within the same setting. And that would probably be the easiest way about transitioning from a one-shot into a campaign. And in between that time frame of you ending your one shot and then starting the next game, you can plan out a new. Some people do it like in sessions of one shots, basically, where they'll set up another 4 hour story arc and then end that arc. And if the players are still invested, they'll do a third arc and a fourth, so on and so forth. So you don't even have to be invested in a long term campaign after that one shot. It could just be a 2 shot or 3 shot, so on and so forth. As long as the players are invested and still want to continue, that would be your driving force to continue it into a campaign.
Yeah, the episodic one shots, it's the best way to lead into a campaign. Another like GM tip would be to end your one shot with a slight cliffhanger. Because if you end it with a cliffhanger, then even if that's how you plan to end the game and that's it, you're never going to play it again, it makes the player go, oh man, I really wonder what happened with such and such. Or I really wonder how our guys are going to get out of this situation that the game ended in. And if you really want to lead it into a campaign, the doors are immediately open for you to do that. I'm a big fan of the episodic campaigns anyway. We ran Gods of the Fall as a one shot. It was a Halloween special one shot, and it turned into a campaign because the final episode ended in a cliffhanger, and it made the players go, hey, do you mind if we play another session? And then that one session led to 5 or 6 sessions. So, if you end your one shots with cliffhangers, there's a good chance that it'll lead into a campaign if that's what you and the players want.
And to add to that, you can always plan it that way too. What I've done in the past is created a couple of actual one shots that are literally one shot campaigns. They're made to have different characters come in and out. They're also made to be episodic in nature. So literally, like Anthony and both Al said, there's a 4-hour story, okay? Because I liked, I was a huge fan back in the day, and I don't care what anybody thinks, but I love Buffy the Vampire Slayer. I did not miss an episode. I watched it faithfully. It was one of the best episodic shows because I loved the writing, I loved the humor. And that was one of the things that I did. I decided to create a campaign kind of based in that thought process. So every time we got together to play, the same characters came back, but they knew within that 4 or 5 hours that we were going to play that night, it was going to hit. And sometimes we had a 2-part episode, but most of the time it was like that. So campaigns, and that's the one caveat, or should I say the one direction. The other side of that is also touching on what Al and Anthony said about, leaving those cliffhangers, and when the one shot is brilliant and awesome, people want to come back and play again. And I'm pointing at you, Anthony, because we need to get back to Sector 57. But yes, that was great, and for those of you who don't know, Anthony ran a cleanup in Sector 57, which was basically all the mundane people on the Death Star, the supply men and the janitors and so on and so forth on the Death Star the day it was attacked by the rebellion. So
yeah, that was a ton of fun. I really loved that game.
Fun. It was like total and utter, chaos in the making. But that's just a prime example of leaving the game at a point that the players are going, hey, I want to do this again. So that's my thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a pretty good segue into the last question we have, which is, what's some advice you have for people who are starting to run one shots and people who do run one shots? What's some good general advice that you can give for that? Go on.
I guess I'll go first. My advice is pretty much advice that I give most GMs is don't overthink it. I mean, it's simple as that. People tend to overthink and overanalyze. Have a concept for a story. Have a mood for your narrative. Have a couple of scenes set up in your head. Maybe some stat blocks. Maybe some ciphers if you run in Cypher System. but let the players fill in the blanks. Especially with a one shot, you'll be surprised how much information and how much narrative the players can add to the story. Let them do the work for you. It's easy.
That is facts.
So I think that would be the one bit of advice I'll have is don't overthink it.
For me, it'll be imagine and execute. That's all. Have fun. Um, I approach every game I run that this is going to be the next most fun time I've had at the table. Um, I
It
don't.
usually is in your games.
Yeah, I mean, I really have a lot of fun running them. But like Anthony said, I mean, and we'll probably always be jumping on each other's bandwagon. But the players add so much. I mean, I know what I do, especially doing a one shot. Something we did not touch on with one shot. Make your pregens. Make interesting pregens. Try to make sure you have pre-generated characters sitting there. So if you're not going to have an extra hour or so to put characters together, there's characters on the table. And the one thing that I always do with my pregens is I try to give a small background blurb that will inspire you further. And I have to say that I think it was Al who did it in my game inspired by the mist. Didn't you play the cop who didn't want to do anything?
Yes, that was me.
He chose his focus before I ever created the pregen, but it was just perfect because it was like I was thinking about what can I do, and it was great. I wrote a small background, this guy really, retired from the military. He was very capable, very talented, but just was completely bored with life. And he didn't want to do anything. So his background story really, just took into account. Listen, he's quite capable, but he moved to this little small town in Bangor, Maine, in Maine, and found a job as a deputy, not even the sheriff. And it was perfect because guess what? Nothing happened here. He could spend his time watching Netflix, and that was what it was. It was great. Al took that and ran with it because not only did he watch Netflix, but he became obsessed with having like the latest HD tablet. Best Buy, it was great. And it just added for me, it gave me canon to run a great game.
And
I was just gonna say the point he said about pregens. It was a point that we absolutely didn't touch on, but he's 100% right. Pregens are the best aid for a GM running one shots. One, the pregens you develop will help you control the narrative. Even though someone else will grab the character, that if you have a set, we usually like to do 12 pregens. If you have a set of 12 pregens, before the game starts that you basically have 12 NPCs, even if they don't get picked, that you could use for your game. And two is no one takes the same pregen and plays it exactly alike.
Exactly.
So you're going to be surprised if someone takes your mercenary pregen and plays them totally different than how you pictured in your head. So pregens, I know some people like to think it's a cop-out, but I couldn't disagree more. I think pregens, no one plays pregens the same. No one plays the same character the same. So you're not forcing a character game style down anyone's throat. And they still have the option to pick from. And they also have the option to make their own characters if they want to. But having those pregens available, even if they don't get picked, those are 12 NPCs that you have already that you could throw into that one shot without fear of you already know what their stat blocks are. You already know what their abilities are. I mean, it only helps you.
Yep, most definitely. But what my piece of advice would be for running one shots is we kind of touched on it a little bit, but don't over plan. Uh, Players will avoid the most of the things you plan. You will plan something on the right, they go left. You try to plan something hidden someplace and they won't even approach it. You would have to more plan what Dean said earlier. You plan like locations and maybe items or something like that, and then you kind of put them in the way that the players go. Don't say, hey, they have to go right when they're gonna go left. No matter how you plan it, they're gonna go left. And instead of saying, hey, you guys needed to go right, you as the GM say, hey, actually the thing was on the left. Like you gotta go with the flow on that. And if you overplan and you kind of get stuck in your plan, it's just not going to work out most of the time. I learned this when I ran my first one shot way back in the day. I think it was 5E for Anthony Spiggs and our real life group. I had planned this whole encounter like they were going to pass by this broken down carriage and they were going to get ambushed as they were inspecting the carriage, and instead they just rode past it. Like they didn't stop. All that planning, I spent maybe 2-3 hours planning that little planning the stats of the monsters and like where they're going to come from, and they didn't even go and check it out. Like that's a really big thing. You just can't over plan. You just do the most basic of plans, and then you work off what the players do.
As the and you hear this from a lot of people too. We know a lot of people who have that mindset about the planning aspect and knowing where everything is, and they'll plan out the dimensions of the room down to the centimeter and the whole 9 yards. And here's the thing: you really have to develop some improvisational skills. You have to develop the ability to adjust, flex, and basically, reimagine on the fly. And that's one of the reasons why you just build a framework. Build your framework. Your framework can be however you envision it. The way I do it for the most part is a holodeck. I look at it like the holodeck on Star Trek. You know what? The computer is designed to adjust. When they explain how the holodeck works, the computer is designed to adjust. And you're in a 10 by 10 by 10 room, but you think you're walking for miles. And that's how I deal with, what Anthony and Al were both saying about players, doing things that you don't expect them to do. You want them to go right, but they go left. They go left no matter how many times you want them to go right.
It's always going to happen.
Right. So, like Al said, I put the things in your way to keep the story moving, and I learned that because I remember, I don't know if they told you, but I'm the old guy around here. I've been gaming for over 40 years. And, I remember back in the good old days, you would play a module or, you'd get your hands on a supplement or something like that. And we came from an era when they didn't give you the whole world. Faerun, didn't exist when they first introduced the Forgotten Realms. The Forgotten Realms were actually literally connected to Greyhawk, and it was an area that was forgotten, literally. And now it's in a full-blown world, and it's its own place in the whole nine. But that's what we would do. We would take a module and drop it right in the middle of our homebrew. And you never ran a module the way it was written. At least we didn't. And that idea.
That's a topic for another video.
Stick with your Cypher system and you'll learn wonders.
And I think with that, first off, we want to thank you, AlphaDean, because he's going to be a permanent member on this fold. So we're happy to have you, and your vast wealth of knowledge is going to be nothing but appreciated. I'm sure everybody watching this is going to appreciate it as well. And like we always say, be sure to like, share, and subscribe. And if there's anything that you want to ask us, or if there's any topics you want us to touch, please put it on the comments down below, and we'll be more than happy to touch those topics. Al, anything you want to say?
No, just thank you all for watching. Always remember to break the mold, attempt the unlimited, and basically see y'all guys later.
And all I'll say is good night. Thanks for having me, and Let's keep doing this, guys. Cypher Unlimited.
We out.
We out of here.
Peace.